Hello everybody and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Legion Chapter 10. This is the second episode of Season 2 and I loved this episode. I liked the first episode. I was on board with the whole Legion thing, but the first episode, I have to say, left me wishing for a little bit more solidity in what people wanted. There's a principle that I learned when I was trying to become a writer back in the day, that when you're plotting out drama or any kind of story that you want to write, you need to have a clearly defined character motivation, a thing that a character wants to get to, at least in the moment, right? In the scene, he needs to be striving for something, and preferably in the larger context of the story as well. And my issue with Chapter 1, I didn't verbalize it well in the previous recap, but as I was thinking about it over the week, my issue with Chapter 1 was I didn't know what David wanted. I didn't know what anybody wanted. Everybody is so opaque, and there's so many mysteries and so many layers of is this reality or not, that I was way far adrift from being able to even empathize with what David was trying to do. And I think that problem has been completely corrected in episode 2 of season 2 here, because we start right off with David talking to Farouk, telling him, and Lenny, by the way, they're all in a carousel, and they're talking about how David is going to help them. David says, I got a message from the future. I don't get it. It's weird, but I trust her. And I love that about David and Syd, by the way. I love that they completely trust each other. And I'm going to help you get your body back. And he lays down one stipulation. He says, no killing. Don't be killing people. Don't hurt anybody. Nobody gets hurt. That's my stipulation. If we can stick with that, then I'll help you out. And we know now, at least nominally, what David's after. Now, it could be he's still playing Farouk, all right? But I think, based on how things play out in the rest of the episode, we can assume that this is a legitimate overture from him, that he is actually going to help him, or try to anyway, up to a certain point, and that these are really the things that he wants. So we've got a good, stake in the ground for where David is trying to go, really over the rest of the season. And then we get, before the credits roll, we get a scene of Farouk as Oliver talking to himself. And he talks to himself over this fortune teller thing out in the middle of nowhere. And it's really interesting for several reasons to me. Something I'll get in a little bit later in a little bit more depth, but there's this crystal ball that is sitting on the fortune teller's table. And we all know the crystal ball myth, right? The idea that you look into this thing, the person who knows how to do it anyway, looks into this thing and gets a vision of the future, that they're able to see something that normal people aren't able to see. And then as we get into the credits, right, the credits appear through this crystal ball as a lens. And as I was watching it the first time, I didn't watch it the second time, but the rest of the episode kind of changed the way I was thinking about this. As I was watching this at first, I thought, okay, this is just a cool visual. But the more I thought about it, the more I wonder if this is not a specific idea being planted in our minds, because the crystal ball is a way to see the future, right? Which we know that this series, at least, the season, seems to be about the messages from the future and interpreting what those messages mean. And there's, some ambiguity there with what Syd is doing and where she's at and all that stuff. But the other thing that is interesting to me is that this crystal ball is a lens. It's a literal glass refracting lens that changes the way you see light. And it made me think about, as we're going to get later on into the episode, they talk about perception of reality sort of being your reality. And one of the ways that we perceive reality today is through a camera lens. A lot of our language is based on what cameras can do and cinematic language. I'm going to get more into that when we get to it, but let's continue on with the recap right now. We jump straight from there to David acting out his plan. He's going to help Oliver out. He's distracting these people. It's not spelled out at the time, but this is my impression of what's going on. He leads them out to this weird thing in the desert, right? This crystal ball setup, which I guess exists. It exists somewhere because they do go to it. They don't have the crystal ball at the time, but they have this, fortune teller thing just set up in the middle of nowhere that he drives them out to. So it's a real location in David's universe for everybody who's there in the truck with him. On the way over there, there's a great conversation, which is going to foreshadow a lot of the stuff that the ideas that they're planting in this episode, where Ptolemy's talking about these weird android people. And first of all, he gives them a name. And secondly, he talks about what they mean to him. Because if you recall, Ptolemy's power is that he is able to get into people's memories, that he can live inside those memories. And he says to David, the Vermilion people, these androids, comfort him in a way because there is no memory for him to access. It's just data. And the contrast between memory and data is yet another sort of stake in the ground here, I think, of what this episode's trying to say about reality, because we think of memories as data. We call the thing that stores data in the computer the memory, okay? But memory isn't data, all right? Memory is tied, maybe on a certain level, but it's tied in with things like emotions and like the way things feel and look and smell, the five senses that we have. Those things are what make up memories, and a whole host of other things that I couldn't even, I'm not a neurologist, so I couldn't begin to expound upon them, but they're a product of the mind. They're not just raw, like, ones and zeros. They are recreations, in a sense, and sometimes of themselves, too, right? One of the great things about memory is that the more times you remember something, you're actually remembering. So the farther you get from the original memory, the more copies of copies you have and the fuzzier it gets. That doesn't happen with data much. I mean, you can run things through a copier a couple times and get them weird looking, but data is data. It doesn't matter how many times you copy it, it should be the same. And memories aren't like that. And so they're putting down this stake in the idea that the mind is a special thing. They go to this, the little stand, the fortune teller stand. There's no Oliver there. And obviously, David knew there wasn't going to be Oliver. What he did not know was that there was going to be this little music box. And it's something Syd recognizes. It's something from her childhood, and we don't know what that means yet. We don't know why Farouk has done this, what this, signals for Syd. All we know is it makes her uncomfortable. All right? It sort of rocks her a little bit when she finds it, and later on she says to David, I did not like it when I found that thing. I do not appreciate that aspect of you working with Farouk. She's cool with everything else, but she's like, no, the music box was uncool. And I think that's something we're going to have play out a little bit more throughout the series. They, while they're here, right, while they're out at the desert in the weird fortune teller place, meanwhile, Oliver and Lenny are invading Division 3. And, of course, this is Legion, so it's weird. All right, everything's weird. They walk in, they're singing show tunes. I didn't recognize the tune, honestly, but it sounded catchy, all right? It sounded like something you'd hear on a show tune type Broadway thing. I assume it's something other people know. And Farouk is just finger gunning people and turning them into dust. In case you've forgotten, that's not what the deal was, right? He's supposed to be cool. He's supposed to not be killing them and turning them into fish and pigs. He goes in and he's looking for something, right? He's trying to find something in Division 3, and he looks in the Chattering Teeth room, all right? That place, he looks in there and does not see what he's trying to find. Meanwhile, Lenny stumbles upon the Carries and they split. And there's a weird, I don't know exactly what's going on here. I assume this is just Farouk bending reality, but he gets, you know, Carrie the girl splits out of Carrie the old man, and Carrie the old man is sucked through the floor to where Lenny's at. Girl Carrie decides, you know, she's going to fight, because that's what she does, and she goes after Farouk, who isn't having none of it. He takes her down and gets away easily. Lenny, with the other Carrie, does this thing with a spoon, and the upshot of this, I don't fully understand everything that's going on here, okay? Or no, I'm sorry, the Carrie had the spoon, but which was an interesting moment, because he's like holding the spoon up, like, what are you going to do with that? It's not a magic, is it a magic spoon? Lenny flicks it though and gets a and we get to the point where the rest of the people get back, and Carrie and Carrie are not able to merge properly. Normally, girl Carrie goes back into guy Carrie, and that isn't working. They're doing their whole like thing, which is fun to see. It's like those uncorrected, no special effects shots of Supergirl in The Flash. I don't know if you've seen those go around the internet, but where the actors are just like acting like they're jumping to fly away and waving their arms like he's doing the wind thing, and it's silly because there's no special effects. It's sort of like that, but intentional. And finally, they kind of get back together, but it goes wrong because guy Carrie ends up inside of girl Carrie. And there's a great, like, sort of Cronenberg moment. Not quite Cronenberg, because it's not, like, gory or anything, but guy Carrie's arm is just sticking out of girl Carrie, and she's like, what is going on? Why is this happening to me? I don't understand. We then get to Melanie, who has been a major downer so far in this series. Last week she was talking to Syd about how crummy it is that their men are always running her off and doing their own things and, you know, coming back to them and expecting them to be loving them and stuff. She's clearly dealing with some things. And right now she's dealing with some stuff by getting high, which really has some interesting echoes of when David and Lenny were getting high in season 1. There was the frog bong. Here there's an elephant bong. I don't know anything about animal symbolism to know what that means. If somebody has some ideas, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'd love you to drop it in the comments, because that would be great. But it seems significant that season 1, season 2, people getting high out of animals. The animals probably matter, but I don't know what they are, what that means in any way. But she gets contacted by Oliver, and Oliver is looking for something called the Monk of the Mego Order. M-I-G-O. I wrote it down because I was watching the subtitles last night. And these monks have supposedly been wiped out by somebody named Miser Sunday. Now, I have dropped the ball this week and not done research on who Miser Sunday is, if that's a character in the Marvel Universe, if the Mego monks are also characters in the Marvel Universe, or if that's something made up for this show. So I am not able to help you with that. But these Mego monks, if they still exist, are supposed to be the key to where Farouk's actual body is. And in the aftermath of this attack, David gets back to Division 3, right? We dealt with the Carries not being able to meld together properly. We've gotten the message from Melanie, but then we cut to David, and he's walking through the hallway where Oliver and Lenny entered, and he's looking at the aftermath. There's no blood, all right, which would be an interesting... I'm always fascinated. The show starts off with this very serious sounding, like, this viewer discretion advised, language, violence, sexuality. Sometimes there wasn't any sexuality this week, but even when they say sexuality, it's like, we're not talking HBO levels of, like, gratuitous boobs and stuff, or any boobs. We're not when they talk about language, I can't remember anybody dropping any F-bombs in this. And the violence, as we'll see later, is like people turning into ninjas and then turning into tanks and shooting smoke with the tanks and then wrestling. It's not like your typical movie type violence, and it really could be in this instant because David definitely feels like he has blood on his hands. We just don't get to see literal blood. He's dealing with the fact that he made this deal. He's let Farouk into the hen house. Mixing metaphors there. The fox into the hen house. And Farouk has done the thing he said not to do. David said, nobody gets hurt. Lots of people got hurt, or at least 10 people got hurt. It maybe not a lot, but many of the guards who were trying to stop him, Farouk didn't bother with teleporting them away or freezing them in place. He just vaporized them. And this, for me, really sort of solidifies that David does, in fact, want to help Oliver and Farouk as well. Farouk get back to his body, but that he feels betrayed by the fact that his end of the deal wasn't kept up. And he goes to Carrie. Now, remembering that Carrie is the girl here still, but she's got Guy Carrie inside of her who knows all the stuff about the technology, and essentially says, I need to get back to the future. He doesn't tell her why, all right? He doesn't say, there's a future Syd, and she told me to do this, and now I need answers. But that's what he's doing. There's a, kind of a great bit here where Carrie's trying to figure out which buttons to push, and Carrie on the inside has to, walk her through it, audibly, which is a fun storytelling beat. But essentially what happens is we get to David squishing back into the future, and he sees Syd again. And Syd is surprised to see David. She says, in this form, which I think is very telling. And David comes to her and says, listen, I just gotten people killed because of what you told me. This is not okay. I need more than shapes in the air. I need you to talk to me and tell me exactly what is at stake. And Syd says to him, yes, those people died, and that's not cool, but something way worse is coming. And Farouk, when it does come, will be able to stop it. You killed him in my timeline. Smashed his head in is the word she uses. And now, everything has gone wrong. That is apocalyptic. I mean, we literally see that many people, the majority of humans are gone because of whatever this incident was that has been set off. And here's what my theory is. Okay? I think that David becomes this apocalypse somehow. I don't know how. I don't know what that means, but somehow this is David's doing. That's just a theory. I have no idea. I saw a lot of people on the boards thinking that David kills Farouk and then Lenny becomes powerful and gets out, or maybe David kills Farouk's consciousness somehow and Lenny gets control of Farouk's body and is able to do a lot of this damage. That doesn't ring true to me. A, because Lenny just never seemed that powerful to begin with. When she had Farouk in her, she was terrifying, all right? Or he, or however you're going to say that. But once, now in this season, she's kind of a lackey. And a lackey that does not seem to be able to do very much or even really be interested in doing very much, as we see later on. She's just wanting to get out and have a good time again. And she's sort of sick of being a servant. I could see maybe her, going on the rampage, but it seems more likely that if Lenny gets out, she's just going to go to a strip club somewhere. I mean, that's more Lenny's brand than cause the apocalypse at this point. So I think David could easily be the one, because of how powerful he is and because of what we've seen with this delusion egg, that he might get a delusion in him that just makes him decide he wants to amputate the entire world. That, again, just speculation, but the way that Syd acts when she sees David, the way she has this sort of wow, you're you again, and I haven't seen you like this before, it makes me wonder if the version of David that she has seen is a monster, possibly literally. who's wiping out the entire globe as they speak in the future. Again, just speculation, but it's a fun theory. And then we get into my favorite part of this episode. We get a chapter heading here, and the voiceover starts talking about agreed reality. And the idea that the perception of reality for humans is the reality, that there's no way of separating those two things out. That the way we experience the world is what the world is to us. And I wanted to get back into this a little bit because this made me think a lot about what Legion is doing as a television show. It's pointing the finger at what cinematic language has done to our minds. There is a theory of mind that talks about words and how that different spoken languages and the range of the types of words that they have can influence the way that people think in real life. The words that they have access to in their language can change the shape of their thoughts. Now, this is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. The strong form, I'm not a fan of, but there's some truth to the idea that language is sort of a part of our reality. And I think what Legion is doing here is it's going further than that. It's saying beyond spoken words, beyond spoken language that we have, there's a new type of language we have now. There's a visual language. And the show Legion is sort of showing us how visual language is used to communicate and how it has changed our minds so much to the point where we think in terms of visual stuff, right? We think of like important moments being slowed down. I've read that in so many books, and I've never, I would have to correlate to be sure, and maybe it does exist before the movie, but I don't think I've ever read about like Charles Dickens writing about like time slowed down when something was said, or the time. We get that idea for the most part from the slow motion shot, all right? We understand things like establishing shots and cuts, all right? The fact that you can cut between two people or even one shot of the same person and not necessarily be confusing is a result of over a century of built-up cinematic language that we've internalized, all right? We have, everybody knows what a lens flare is, right? Everybody has seen a movie with a lens flare, and our movies use lens flares as a linguistic element, right? Despite the fact that no human person has ever in real life seen a lens flare. Because the lens flare is the artifact of the way the lenses work in the camera. Right? It's an aberration. It's not supposed to be there. The first guy who saw it was probably super annoyed that he like got this weird, why are all these sun circles on my film? This is garbage, all right? And even to go back to things like black and white film. Black and white film means something to us today because of the history of cinema. But when it was made, nobody started out making black and white film thinking this black and white thing looks cool. Like, we're going to stick with black and white for a while, and maybe eventually we'll get color, but color's lame. Like, they did it because that was all they had. If they'd had access to color film to start with, we would have never had this idea of the past being faded and a different color. But all of those things have saturated our minds with the cinematic language that all movies share, and by extension everyone who's ever seen a movie, which is most people in the world. We all speak or at least understand this language. We know, and there are cuts that you can make that are jarring, and we say, well, that's bad grammar in the language of cinema. I think that is some of what Legion's doing here. It's saying reality is our perception, and our perception changes based on what we have in our heads. And Legion is trying to add more stuff to our heads. It's trying to push the boundaries of what a cinematic like a cut or, you know, a wide shot or what any of that means, and it's maybe I'm giving it too much credit, but it really got me going yesterday, just thinking about all of the ways that this show messes with cinematography and messes with editing in a, you know, a sense, a way to trying to jar us out of what we know about cinema. And I think that is sort of part and parcel with this, of the idea that reality is what we perceive it to be. And it's based on what we already have in our head, and it's based on, you know, all the stuff we've consumed. And madness is just the not being able to agree on what that reality is. Okay, that's my screed over. I'll keep talking about the episode now, but if Legion doesn't make you think, then I don't even know what the point is of watching any television. If you haven't gotten something cool out of watching this show, that was my favorite part from this week. So I've had to share sort of the rabbit trail that sent my brain on. David contacts Farouk, and he goes into this confrontation with Farouk with his big old, like, he got that giant, I was going to say not Dan Simmons, I forget what the name of but, you know, he has, David Haller has this sort of one-sided smile that he does. I can't do it right, all right? He does it really charming and cool looking. But in this shot in particular, it just sort of annoyed me, because David has lost control. I don't know why he thinks he's just going to go into this, you know, this mind meld and kick butt. Like, what are you doing? He's coming off of a conversation with the psychologist from the first season who sort of like said, well, what are you good for? You know, you're not helping us. And I guess there's some of that, like, just ego, like, I'll show you what I'm good for. But I'm glad he does not get the upper hand here, because my thought as we cut to commercial from that giant smirk on his face was, somebody please wipe that smile off his face. What a goober. Come on, man. You're going to lose. And he does, kinda. He goes and meets with the real Farouk now. Finally, possibly. Although I have a theory that that this is another projection, but this time Farouk is using the real face of Fukuyama, so that when Fukuyama finally takes the basket off his head, David will not trust him. Or Fukuyama's Farouk. Those are two possibilities. Especially because Fukuyama is wearing a basket on his head, possibly some kind of psychic shielding, right? He's operating through other entities that aren't him. So I don't know, any one of those things is possible. I haven't actually seen Fukuyama say anything. But they have this talk, and Farouk is charming, but evil, okay? I really like this iteration of the Shadow King. And David doubles down on the no violence. He says, listen, I'm going to help you. And Farouk, by the way, says, if you do help me, I'll be in your debt, and that does mean something to me. All right, I have some kind of honor. I'm not just like a two-bit thug. So they kind of work out their differences. They have this great psychic battle I alluded to earlier, where they sort of change into things, and essentially Farouk is trying to get David to realize he can do anything. And we mentioned earlier that stand, right, where they were, that fortune telling stand is a physical object that exists, at least for all the people that were in that truck, okay? Don't get me started on the literally everything's in David head theory, because maybe we'll get some confirmation of that at some point, or maybe that's just a fruitless... Anyway, but Farouk walks away from there and like wipes it from existence with his thumb as he's going to go into this conversation with Lenny. And so you see that his proposal to David is very real. The idea that these guys can alter reality significantly is not a fake out on Farouk's part. He does, I mean, it reminds me of the, we can rule the galaxy as father and son. Probably they would fight, all right? He's not asking David to be co-ruler with him, but he is saying, dude, like, level up here. You got so much power, and you're like still piddling around doing psychic projections and stuff. Like, just change the world. I don't know what Farouk is trying to gain here, other than I think maybe he just wants to see what happens. I like the idea of a Farouk is kind of just a chaos god in a sense, like just poking sticks at thing and seeing what comes out. But regardless, he makes up with David. David says, I will continue to help you. Farouk says, you have my word, no more killing. And we get the scene with Lenny where she wants to get out. And there's a great moment in this scene. Farouk is talking to Lenny. He says, well, listen, your body's dead. What are you going to go back to? And she says, well, you can make me another one, which probably he could. But he says, he keeps asking her, and then what? She says, well, and then I would go and have fun in the body. And he says, and then what? And he says, well, then I would eventually die. And then Farouk's last question is, and then what? I don't know if this is a universe that has an afterlife within the context of the TV show, if that's what Farouk is implying. If Lenny's soul or mind or whatever would be back flying around out in the world, or if Farouk is saying that none of this is real and she would escape to the real reality if she died, I have no idea. All right. And this idea that this level of reality is not real and you can escape it if you died, I just thought about, if David gets that idea in his head, it could be what causes him to go on the killing spree of all the people in this universe. Because if he even believes that, then this is just, again, if we're talking about, this is a theory on top of a theory, whether or not it's true, that would be an interesting sort of idea of this inception egg getting inside of his head and making him think, oh, this is not real, so I need to level people out to the real thing. Following that up, and it's something that kind of plays on earlier what I was saying about the sort of language of movies. There's a Carrie and Carrie, they finally get separated, but they can't, girl Carrie can't get back inside of guy Carrie. And she's not happy about this. And she says to him, listen, I don't want to be outside for all the boring stuff. And again, it made me think about the language of movies. The way that Carrie, the girl, has lived her life is like someone would live a movie. Where in a movie, you don't see an hour of somebody commuting to work. You don't see 8 hours of somebody sleeping. You don't see, there's just masses of real life that aren't worth talking about and showing. You don't, in a movie, you don't watch somebody watch an entire television show. You get like snippets. And that's how Carrie's existed. She's gone from action scene to action scene to action scene, only coming out when there was something interesting to see, something worth seeing. She's lived her life in this very story-like mode, whereas the real Carrie, the guy, sorry, not the real Carrie, but the guy Carrie has lived through all the boring stuff that all the rest of us have to live through, and she's facing this reality now that real life is not just an endless chain of action scenes, which it kind of has been for her up until this point. Melanie's still in the dumps, still mad at David. There's some indication that she's probably got one of these things inside of her at this point. I think we saw one of them crawling towards her, although I could be wrong. But, she's all down and out still about, I don't know. She tells David to go and run off with Syd and live their lives. And it sounds like good advice, all right? But coming from Melanie, who's just so bitter, go and live your life is a good advice. Abandon everybody else, maybe not so much. And I'm not on board with Melanie here. Maybe the show is, but I think she's probably off base for what Albert believes. That there is worth in trying to make the world a better place, and that is part of what living is. David walks away. All right, he goes up to the rooftop and meets someone who's a lot less downer. And he talks to Syd and tells Syd about what is going on. He says, I talked to you from the future. You said not to tell anyone, but you're the person I talked to, so maybe it's okay. And she gets on board with it. And I mentioned this earlier where, David trusts Syd from the future and just says, okay, we're going to go with what you said to do. Syd trusts David. And she says, listen, we're going to go with what you said to do. That's cool. I'm on board with that. And the level of trust between these two is such a refreshing thing in this show about a world where things are topsy-turvy and crazy, the fact that the thing they go back to, that their rock is not like some kind of, shared reality of I see this and you see this, so we're both on the same page, but rather I trust you and you trust me, and that's not going to change. That their shared vision of reality is based on trust. That's a great anchor point for their relationship, and I really, really love that. By the way, a lot of people speculating about these fingers pointing at David and the fact that they're green, and the flashback earlier, not the flashback, but the little idea about infecting someone's mind earlier said, what if you teach someone that red is green and green is red, and then show them a red light and say red means go, or red means stop and green means go, and they don't know the difference there. There's all these green hands, and they're always pointing to David. There are these giant balloons. I have no idea what that means. Maybe we'll find out. Maybe we won't. Maybe I'm just being dense. But it seems like an interesting image, to be sure, that they're up on top. It also just gives you the great weirdness of this world, the sense that it's not our world. There's no rooftop in the world that looks like that exactly. So it was cool to get that kind of thing. But the conclusion of this scene is Syd saying to David, like you said, reality is a choice. And that's not something that David said. All right, that's something I think that Farouk said, and did not say it to Syd. How far down into the crackpot hole can I go with this? Is everybody David on some level? Are they all just extensions of his personality? And does that matter if we're just going to say perception is the same thing as reality? The show seems not to care. It just seems to say, listen, we're going to float like a butterfly and also sting like a butterfly because this butterfly has a stinger because we're Legion and we can do that. So hands up in the air, just sort of, I'm going to go with it, but there's something wrong there. David did not say that to Syd. And in the conclusion of the episode, right, David and Syd decide to go find this Mego monk in the Division 3, and we cut to what I assume is the Mego monk in Division 3 hiding out in the Chattery Teeth room. Just chilling. Which you would have to be a monk to be chill in that room, because it's just so creepy. It's such a wonderful, I was going to say image, but it really works on a sound level as well. Just the clackety clacking of all of those teeth, and those people just stuck in there in whatever sort of mental suspended animation that Farouk put them in. That guy, that takes some guts to stay in there long term, to just be like, this is my hideout now. Although I guess it's a good, I wouldn't want to go in there looking for him, so I guess it's a good place. And to call back, Farouk was sort of drawn to that room when he did the invasion. He was looking at it and did not make it inside. I don't know why. I don't know if the chattery teeth people are some kind of repellent to Farouk, or if he just decided that, well, those people I've already dealt with, so clearly that's not them. But he didn't interact with the chattery teeth people when he broke in, so I guess it's a good hiding spot. Monk has not been found up until now, so cool on him. And that's this episode. I'm sorry I went a little bit longer, I guess, than I normally do, but I got very excited about a lot of the ideas and the ways this show is turning out. I'm so happy that we've got at least a handle on what is what David thinks is going on, right? And what he's trying to do. So that's nice. And I think we're really strong going forward now that we know exactly what the stakes are, exactly what everybody is attempting to do. And I'm interested to see how all of these sort of different characters clash together as we go forward, because Melanie's, funk that she's in, and the whole Carrie situation, all of these sort of different characters that want different things, I think there's a potential for them to bounce off each other in some really interesting ways. But we will have to wait and see for that. Hope you guys enjoyed this. If you're watching this on YouTube, I would love to hear your comments. leave them underneath. You know how to do comments. I was going to explain where to do that, but anyway, let me know if I missed something or if you think that I'm wrong about something. I enjoy reading those. I try to respond to as many of them as I can, as quickly as I can, although it depends. Sometimes on the weekends I'm doing weekend things. So I really appreciate your feedback and hopefully make me a little smarter. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you did, click that like button. And if you want this in audio-only format, this podcast also exists as just a podcast, all right? And you can find that link down in the description below and subscribe to that. We are also covering Krypton on the same feed where we're covering Legion. So that's a very different show and not as good. But them superheroes are good. Very different comic show. I didn't even think about the fact that they're both comic shows because they're so different. Anyway, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for watching. Y'all take care.